All right, we're going to get started. Okay. Thank you, everybody, for showing up. We're going to be talking about crafting magic for LitRPG, and I am Clark R. Rowenson. Can you trust me? Debatable. But I am a writing coach and an author and a blogger and just a general magic system nut job. That's why this is my third presentation on magic systems in 3 days, and I would do more if they would let me. So I've worked with a whole bunch of different kinds of authors. Again, can you trust me? I don't know. But if what I say makes sense, use it. If it doesn't, ignore it. Try and find what works for you. I'm just going to break it down and what makes sense in my weird brain and see if it helps. So as we're going through this, there's a couple things I just want you to understand the scope of how we're looking at things. So originally, this talk was just going to be LitRPG. And then I realized it kind of applies to absolutely all progression fantasy. So that's, just bear that in mind. We're going to talk about the different kinds of progression fantasy and that kind of stuff. This does assume you have a little bit of prior knowledge about stages of building a magic system or the other stuff I've talked about. It's not essential, but it all builds on top of itself. So if you ask me how to build a magic system for LitRPG, short answer, it's the same as building a magic system for fantasy. Same 7 steps, just some additional considerations that we're going to talk about. I'm also assuming that you want balanced characters, which is a big assumption. There is an entire subsect of LitRPG that is around unbalanced OP characters. If you're doing that, that's fine. What I talk about balancing things isn't going to matter to you. We are going to try and go through information about what I really want to get you guys is how to build a spell and how to level it up and how it can progress. I'm not going to be talking about, if we talk about it as painting, I'm not going to be talking about techniques. I'm not going to be talking about style or composition. I'm talking about the types of paints you can use and the types of brushes you have. That's what this is about. So again, this is not an introduction to game design. Bunch of stuff I want to talk about there, but we have 42 minutes. We might get a little bit into building classes, but not as much. This isn't about mechanics, not of game mechanics. Well, it is, but it isn't. I had a really hard time separating the two as we went through this. But we're really going to get into different types of LitRPG, what makes it different, most importantly, how number go up. Gonna try and make sure we get to talking about how to plan your progression arc. Very important. Also going to look at how to manage the power creep and avoid the DBZ effect. You all know what I'm talking about. Also want to get into how to generate patterns, add flavor, and add branching development paths for your magic and your classes. So that's where we're a little bit about classes, but kind of not really. We may or may not get to that to time because I really want to make sure we have time for Q&A. And earlier somebody asked what my favorites were. I'm going to reference those systems a lot. Okay, let's talk about LitRPG versus other sci-fi fantasy subgenres. Progression fantasy, which, okay, does anybody in here not know what these are? Don't be embarrassed, but I can skip past these if I'm wasting time. Okay, we'll keep it real simple. It's an umbrella term. Progression fantasy is where the process of power growth and development is a central focus of the story. Dresden Files, Dresden gets more powerful, but it is not the focus of the story. Mother of Learning, Having Zorian get better with his magic missile and with his shields and with his spells is a core part of what gets talked about in the narrative and over the course of the story. Progression fantasy. The progression of Zorian really, really matters. The progression of Dresden is cool, but isn't essential. Now, when we're talking about power growth, this can refer to magic, wealth, skills, political clout, pretty much anything. You have some settlement development LitRPG where it's about the building of the town. And that progression, that building, is what is important. So it's an umbrella term that covers both LitRPG and cultivation. LitRPG is where there's specifically game mechanics as part of the story. It's one of those things that's hard to explain, and then once you see it, you get what it means. But if anybody has read anything by R.A. Salvatore, if you slapped D&D character sheets into the narrative, that's LitRPG. The setting is often, but not always, a virtual world. Sometimes it is a game system imposed on reality. That does happen. You get some weird ones, like in Dungeon Crawler Carl. There's some fun stuff happening there of like the AIs and pockets of reality being modified, or System Apocalypse is a very common one where our world basically gets destroyed because a system is suddenly imposed upon us and it wrecks everything. It has characters who level up, earn XP, navigate the worlds, all with game-like rules. Cultivation comes from more wuxia, and it is heavily Eastern Chinese influenced, is where a lot of that originated, because it almost always has people cultivating energy of ki or chi. Not always. He who fights with monsters ignores that. It's just straight up cultivation and just progressing your ranks. Not necessary, but there is that core energy that is being evolved. The main difference, LitRPG has classes and levels, or well, a main difference. Cultivation has tiers of ascension that get you closer and closer to immortality, invincibility, and godhood. Those are the general trends. Did I miss anything? Cool. All right, let's get into the dials and sliders for your magic, AKA where the number go up. So this is, hang on. Dramatic pause. This is one of those things that as I was doing it, I'm like, is this going to be really obvious to people? And they're going to be like, who is this guy telling me what I already know? But we're going to do it anyway. When you're dealing with a spell, creating a spell, the effect comes first. You need to identify what the spell is supposed to do. Otherwise, what's the point? Now, we can have a whole conversation about creating, determining magical effects and deciding what they do and brainstorming those. That is a whole other hour conversation that we could have. So I'm going to have to gloss past that for now. Once you have the effect, how can we make number go up? And we're going to go over all of these in more detail. So don't worry about capturing it all right now if anybody's taking notes or whatever. Or I'm just going to tell myself you're taking notes, even if you're not, because it makes me feel better. But we have range and distance. You've got duration, power/magnitude, cost efficiency, the area or number of targets, and the malleability of the spell. That's just half. We've also got casting time, reliability, new capabilities, buffs, additional buffs and debuffs, and then you can start combining spells and effects and increasing success rate. These are your paints and brushes. These are the things that you can change to make number go up. So let's start going through these a little bit at a time. Range and distance. Pretty self-explanatory, but I'm just going to go through these a bit at a time, talk about what it is through some of what the ranges are, and if I can think of it, some examples. Oh, that's a really annoying thing I just noticed. With my voice being out, I've gotten extra subconscious, and I'm using a lot more crutch words, which sucks. See, there it is again. So when we're talking about, that's what I wanted to say. So who made it to the presentation on Tuesday? Okay, so when I talked about testing your system, there's going to be a lot of circling back to that. As I'm talking through these individual pieces, these are the things you can test. And when we're looking at it, I'm going to talk about extremes. That is what you test when you're really trying to push the limits. So with range and distance, how far can it reach? At what distance is a potential target safe? At what distance is the generator of the magical effect safe? Is this touch? Is it line of sight? Is it a specific distance? And who here plays D&D or other tabletop RPGs? Almost everybody. So that should already be making sense just in terms of how those spells work. That's what distance is. Increase any of those things, and it starts, number is going up. And line of sight can become vague. So it's not just direct line of sight, but it's through cameras. Lots of options. How long does a spell's effect persist after it has been cast? Now, with this, you can have specific timed countdowns. You can change how long until the next state change if things are transitioning. So if the spell progresses like a curse or something like that, you can speed up or slow down how fast those things happen. Poison ticks is another example of that. I may have a spell that is actually increasing the duration between poison ticks because that applied to me because that's beneficial. It keeps me alive. And this can also change the duration until the resource runs out. So if you're placing some kind of totem or something that's putting an ongoing effect, how long does the ongoing effect last through the area? And these all kind of start to blend together. And at this point, I'm sure you guys are starting to get the picture, so hopefully this doesn't get pedantic, but here we go. Power and magnitude, because it's over 9,000. How much energy, how many joules, how many points of damage, whatever, does the spell do? Number go up. Oh yeah, that's pretty much it. Number go up. Does more damage, more points, more energy. Cost efficiency, mana cost. How much do you have to pay in order to access or use the ability? So it can be the specific amount of MP. It can be dealing with the resources that are used to fuel the power. So with allomancy, if the required metal, the amount of required metal went down as people got more skilled, that would be an example of this. Man, my voice was doing so good. And I have no idea what I was thinking with that last one. That's right. Thank you. The trading of the firstborn child. Because why wouldn't I do that? Number of targets or AoE. How many trash mobs can this deal with in a single spell? More targets, more people adjacent to target, bigger area of effect. All of that kind of stuff is number of targets or scope increasing for the spell. Malleability. This is where things are starting to get a little weird. The others are a little more straightforward. But with malleability, how creative can a magic user get with how they put the spell to use? Can they change the effect in any way, or is it completely static? I have the ability to summon a blade of flame. Can I then change that to be an axe of flame or a bow of flame? Or is it just a sword and that's all I get? That's malleability. Being able to shape the effects a little bit. We talked about AoE going up. Being able to make it so that I don't hit everything. I'm able to turn a circle into a cone, into a donut. That's all me molding and adjusting the spell itself, or changing the nature of the spell itself, from poison damage to acid damage to fire damage, changing it from a buff of speed to a debuff of speed, depending on who I'm targeting. That's all malleability. Casting time, pretty self-explanatory. The main things here is you have instantaneous effects, you have charge abilities, and then you have long casting times. I mean, at this point, I think a lot of this is pretty straightforward. The more I talk, the more I'm like, yeah, this is super obvious, Clark. Reliability and success rate is another interesting one, though. Because this is where, this is a nice place for a number to go up. This can be with a fixed chance of triggering, especially if there's secondary effects and there's an increasing chance of it triggering, or decreasing the chances of an enemy resisting the effects is another way to look at that. Or homing functions, or auto-targeting functions, or splitting functions. These are all things that make it more likely that the spell will do what you want it to do. So a stealth spell is a perfect example of just having it say, you become X% harder to detect. And then as that spell goes up, X becomes bigger. Success rate went up. You can also add new capabilities. So, sorry guys, throat is not happy. You can add additional themes or motifs to what people are doing. You can go from being just a pyromancer to being a druidic pyromancer. You can change it from being a steel-based spell to a steel and stone spell. You start stacking things on top of each other. You can also be adding additional damage over time effects, adding additional buffs, adding additional debuffs, additional stat effects. Make the spell do more. You can start combining things. Best example of this, Viridian Gate Online, towards the end, spoilers, he gets to combine two of his prime abilities into a completely new one that allows him to make tiny portals basically wherever he wants, and then he abuses the crap out of it, and it's awesome. And this is a point where this is a really solid point for characters, and depending on the system, showing them getting control over the system. Because at that point, they're taking two things that were supposed to be separate, and they are forcing them to combine, or they're taking advantage of stuff that was already in play in new and interesting ways. So, oil slick spell, fireball spell, floor is lava. You get how that works. And just starting to stack things on top in new ways into new things. Okay. Any questions so far? Blindingly obvious? Okay. Hopefully not. All right. When you are dealing with your progression arc, these are the main things you want to consider. I will let you read that. Okay, for the starting and end point, for your spell, you want to make sure, basically that. You pick the start and end point for those different variables so you can plan the development path. How much damage does it start with? How much damage does it end with? That's basically all there is to that. This is where you can start digging into what it's in order to determine where you want it to start and where you want it to end. This will be affected by how your system works and how you want people to grow, which that's more than we can talk about just here, but it's something to bear in mind, because if the spell it's whether you have the spell continue to level or the spell stays the same and then you unlock additional more powerful spells. It's slight variance, but it's mostly the same. You do want to think about what it's going to be used for, whether it's combat, utility, or just entertainment. And this is where I said this ties back to the testing. This ties back to the testing I mentioned on Tuesday. You want to look at how low you can set the dials before it becomes completely useless, and then look at how high you can set the dials and sliders before it becomes completely overpowered. Then you decide where you want to start and end on that spectrum. So we know the gap. We know where it starts, we know where it ends. You want to figure out what this curve looks like. Are you going to have growth plateaus? How long do people spend in different stages? How long does each stage take? And how do people progress? This is really, really important. This is where I start sliding into mechanics of the system. But how do people get better? Is it just XP? Is it practice? How do they improve? And what does that look like? With the power curve, thinking about how different level characters are going to compare. Is it linear, where a level 10 character is 10 times more powerful than a level 1 and half as powerful as a level 20? Or is it a smoother curve? Or is it sort of an inverse? In Ascend Online, levels 1 through 10 are kind of linear. Then there's a big spike. Then 10 through, I think it's 30, are linear again. And then there's a big spike in power. So when you're in those different bands, you have a huge leg up on the people below you, a huge disadvantage on the people above you, but then it's linear within your band. So you want to start thinking about how you want, that's what I mean by what does it look like? If you were to graph it out across the levels, how would the power level compare across character levels? Okay, as usual, even with my voice going out, I have been talking way too fast, but that means we can talk about arc variance. Maybe. Okay. What I mean by strength levels is how does the spell change when cast by a powerful magic user as opposed to an average one, or a weaker one. Same spell, same progression, but where do people sit? Where do they compare? Does the effect or purpose change when it's cast by a bard rather than a sorcerer, or is it exactly the same? Is it weaker? Is it optimized for specific places, specific people? What kinds of shortcuts and glitches can people implement to alter the spell's effects or adjust the dials and sliders? Like these, that's the adjustments you want to be thinking through as you're building this out. Okay, DBZ effect. We all know what this means. We have Super Saiyan 1, then Super Saiyan 2, and it goes on and on and on. This happens a lot, especially in serialized fiction. And I'm a little tired of it. I don't know about anybody else. This happens mostly when the character becomes too powerful, but people aren't ready to move on from the story. So your main options there are to either expand the power arc or leave the story. But there's money to be made, so we're not going to leave the story. And so they just keep expanding and moving it forward on and on and on. I personally find it really hard to be invested in protagonists that are dealing with this kind of stuff. So to avoid it, there's a couple of things you can do at the beginning that will really, really help. One of the big ones is just what we've talked about. Understand what you want the true peak to be before you start progressing your character. Know what the end game is. You don't need exact stats, but cultivation, end game, is godhood. And then there's gods among gods. Like, that is how that works. And cultivation can do the Super Saiyan in a weird way, because then when you get to a certain level, you are in a whole new band of existence with a whole new band of structures. And the ones below you are no longer relevant, and they don't deal with them at all. Once you have that identified, the biggest thing you can do is foreshadow those peaks. Let people see that the power spikes exist before your character reaches them. That was the main problem with DBZ, is they would get to where I am now the number one. Oh, I'm not number one? Now I'm number one. I'm not number one? Like, whereas if they had been able to say, oh, those are some scary people, and he slowly built his way to it, that would be completely different. Also, I say this when I talk about magic in general, it applies equally here. Just because a character is overpowered in one area doesn't mean they can't be challenged. So if they have reached the pinnacle of something, challenge them a new way. Can't state that enough. Challenge them a new way. If they are the best duelist in the world, put them on the battlefield. Put them in a spy game. Change things up. Or hell, put them in a romance. And jokes of dueling and romance aside, we're just going to move forward because I realized how bad that was after the fact. But make sure that you also allow other characters to grow. Going back to DBZ, has anybody seen DBZ Abridged? Yeah. There's a Krillin-owned count where they just tally up how many times Krillin gets the crap kicked out of him. And that's because they spent all of their time having these same three people get better. And it got boring. So let other people level up. Let your antagonist level up. So I beat him in book 1, and now I'm off doing my thing, and he just showed up and did a bunch of power leveling, and I'm in real trouble. Like, Freudian Gate Online, so good. Whoops, wrong button. So please, pay attention to the power arc. It is one of the most frustrating things, and now you know what the dials are. You know what tools you have to adjust. Hopefully it wasn't too obvious and wasn't too boring, and you guys were patient with me as my voice is continuing to sound like a teenager. So whatever you guys do, I want to make sure that you keep writing and stay awesome. Now, really brief mention, my stuff. I'm not going to pitch it too hard. I do have a newsletter on my site, do have a Patreon, yada, yada, yada. I'm going to be at the thing tomorrow. But if you have questions for me, if you want to talk magic, if you want to talk through your RPG system, or you just want to nerd out about LitRPG, please email me. I will have business cards up here. Now, the question for this is we can talk about branching paths for classes, or I can open it up to Q&A. Is there a show of hands for branching paths? Damn it. Okay. Okay. A lot of this is going to be very similar to when you're building your classes to begin with. But I really wanted to get into how you can split play styles basically infinitely, because there's a lot of fun there. That's one of the things you asked. That's what He Who Fights with Monsters does so well, is it has it set up so there's a base structure, infinite combinations, infinite branches. For people who haven't read He Who Fights with Monsters, characters get 4 essences. Every essence has 5 abilities. The essences you get can be anything. The abilities you get vary wildly depending on the ability stones you get. So if I get And if I get a Doomstone and a sword skill, that'll be different than a Doomstone and a bow skill. And just that distinction, infinite combinations. Your main factors to play with here are the play styles, the themes and motifs, and then the strengths and weaknesses. Play styles we're pretty familiar with, right? How do the different characters express themselves through the system in the game world? You've got your standard party roles, and you've got your standard combat styles. Just start combining them or changing them. These are just some things I completely made up. So you can have the Mirage Acrobat. You want to add some themes and mediums to it. Mirage Acrobat of the sands or of the clouds. All you did was add a theme. And now you have a whole bunch of themes. Mirage Acrobat of the leaf, of the wind, of the stream. Lots and lots of variants of playstyle and characters that you can go with. With a grappler, you can change it to be a vine grappler, an aerial grappler, or we could stick with the Mirage factor and have the Mirage Acrobat, the Mirage Grappler, the Mirage Sniper. It's just about splitting these things apart, combining them, and splitting them further. And that is all I had for the backup slides. So apparently we are done, and it is time for Q&A. Thank God. But thank you, everybody. Please go to the mic for your questions, because I don't know that I can repeat them. Into the mic, really into the mic. Oh, is it up?
Hello.
There we go.
So let's say you've been tasked with adapting one of these progression fantasies, specifically Cultivation, and you have the Dragon Ball Z problem. You have a character that's overpowered almost immediately in your story, and you kind of, in success, you'll have many seasons of TV show with this. How do you solve that up front? How would you approach an adaptation for something that is overpowered on day one?
You're not going to like my answer. I wouldn't do it. Because if it is already popular enough that they want to make it into a TV show, then the fans are already on board with the overpowered curve. And by breaking that, you're going to upset the fans and maybe mess it up and not get new ones. So that's the game you need to play, is whether you're trying to give a new version of the story for the people who already love it, or you're really focusing on bringing new people in, because then it can go the other way. They may really like the show/movie and then get to the novel/manga and be very frustrated. So probably a conversation to have with the artist and decide how they want to deal with that. And if they become overpowered immediately, it's just like with a novel, you're probably going to need to restructure some things. There's going to be some rewriting that needs to be done. You can probably scale the numbers back and still have things be complicated. You might be able to just push the numbers further out and have a smoother curve and not actually change any of the successes or failures. It gets tricky. I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, I guess the brief follow-up would be, have you seen it done well in books where there is a Dragon Ball Z problem, but it's done in a creative or way that is actually satisfying compared to a more traditional storytelling arc?
The best ones are where they then uncover a new world they didn't know existed.
Okay.
So then there's a whole new sandbox to play in. Yeah. And it's not just one thing that's sitting there. And it's not just, I need to defeat this one person, this one threat that is above me. It is, I am in a whole new world of people that are better than me. Like that's where it was with DBZ. It was only ever one threat or group of threats at a time. It wasn't, hey, here's a whole new reality where you are the weakest fighter, have fun. Other than that, there is just the whole overpowered subgenre, which I'm not a fan of. I know a lot of people like it, And I'm sure some people will be mad at me for saying that, but yeah.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
There is a question from the virtual audience. Rob asked something rather simple. Can we get your email?
Yes, it is just clark@crrowenson.com. You can also just go to crrowenson.com and contact me there. Any other questions? Okay, I was going to say that means either I was perfect or you guys are just so bored you're just waiting to escape.
All right, so you brought up DBZ Abridged. Now, if DBZ, you know Mr. Popo's power level in DBZ Abridged, right? No? You don't know the Mr. Popo
I know Mr. Popo. I don't know what his actual power level is.
in DBZ Abridged?
I just know that you obey Mr. Popo because there's the pecking order.
Yes.
Like, that's all I know.
So, DBZ Abridged makes Mr. Popo the pinnacle of the world, always present. Had DBZ done that itself from the beginning, do you think that would have solved a lot of the power creep issues you speak of the series, or still no?
It would have helped. The other part of the problem is what we were just talking about, is it was only ever one threat at a time. So it was one opponent. One opponent has shown up that is better than me. So it doesn't actually feel like a new tier of play so much as somebody has beat me in the ranks and I need to take them down. I guess I'm
What about
just...
on Namek?
Namek was better. Shifting over to Namek or shifting to a new world or something like that is better. And now that I'm saying that, I'm realizing that's the difference. Is somebody kicked you out of number 1 rank over and over, gets boring. Discovering new tiers of play, interesting. Any other questions? Okay, good.
Going from super OP to low OP, how would you suggest handling this in a system that was more casual, like the farming subgenre or the my life and whatever kind of thing?
So those are great because those are a perfect area for you to challenge them in ways that their OP abilities don't matter. Almost swore there and I caught myself. But it allows you to challenge them in ways that their abilities don't do squat. I think there's like the farmer mage, the battle mage farmer, something like that. Yeah, so that's an example of like, so you can wipe out an army. Good luck getting your beans to grow, jerk. Like, there's lots of room for that. And, could be some amazing comedy to be had in there. Any other questions? Please. It's okay. I only have to make it 6 more minutes. There I can just wave. Like, just wave and point at my books. Like, that's all I need to do. Anything else, guys? Come on, I know you've got them. It doesn't have to be about this. LitRPG in general, game systems in general, magic in general.
I just had one. Do I need to go to the mic? What do you think the most balanced magic system is out there? Is there one that you would say is the most balanced?
I don't know that that exists because it depends on what you're trying to do. It depends. Favorite answer. It depends on what you're trying to do and how that curve is set up. And it's going to be highly individualized whether people like that curve or not. So I really like the setup for He Who Fights with Monsters. My opinion. I felt like he started to blaze through the higher ranks a little fast, given how difficult the higher ranks were supposed to be. But that's me. The balance felt really good at the beginning, but then it seemed it accelerated really fast. Granted, the threat really accelerated, but that I don't have a good example. Sorry. It depends. Well, in that case, I think we might be done. I will be here if you guys want to come up and ask anything or grab any cards. Thank you for being patient. And also, I would love any, and oh, we have one more question. I would love any and all feedback, like comments and self-flagellation aside. If this was too basic, please let me know. Because when I do these things, I want this to be useful. I need this to be at the level that you guys get the information you hadn't considered. Too dumbed down? Let me know. If I just need to expand on things, let me know.
Nathan asks, can RPG systems be useful in planning non-LitRPG magic systems in fiction? If so, is there an existing RPG system you'd recommend for doing that?
1000% yes. Especially if you are doing rational magic. There is no better way than to build in these actual rules and mandated rationale that you have to follow than to keep a rational system. In terms of ones I would recommend, my favorite right now is Open Legend. It is completely open source. It has a really cool, some really cool core mechanics. It adopts some really cool storytelling mechanics that I've used in all of my games since then. And I think, I actually have a video on this. I think it is the best game system for homebrew magic. So, Open Legend, check it out. Other than that, thank you, everybody. And I'll talk to anybody who comes up.